Can you hear now? Now we are good. All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay, so good morning. My name is Sofia Aguilar. I'm 13 years old. I'm in the 8th grade, and I was born in El Salvador.
Good morning. My name is Dylan Floresto. I'm 14 years old. I'm in eighth grade, and I love to go to the gym.
Good morning. My name is Maya Mirza. I'm 14. I'm in the 8th grade, and I've been dancing since I was 2.
Good morning. My name is Aiden Jones. I am 14 in the 8th grade, and I play basketball, volleyball, and golf.
Good morning. My name is Sophia Arenas. I am 14 years old in the 8th grade, and I'm currently learning Japanese.
Our instructors are Mr. and Mrs. Murphy.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning. Hello, and thank you, instructors. And thank you to this Unit 1 panel. What a multi-talented group. Fantastic. So let's proceed with the question today. We have the second question, of course. And so it reads, how does civic virtue relate to working for the common good in a democratic society? And why is the practice of civic virtue and the pursuit of the common good important for the well-being of society? What are some current or historical examples of individuals who have demonstrated a commitment to the common good of their communities? How can individuals contribute to these ideals in their own communities and in society at large? You may begin when you're ready.
Peter Marshall, former chaplain of the U.S. Senate, said, "May we think of freedom, not as the right to do as we please, but the opportunity to do what is right."
Civic virtue is putting aside self-interest for the common good. The common good is the well-being of society.
When participating in civic virtue, your intentions are to benefit the interests of all.
A democratic republic, such as the United States, cannot perform properly without a strong foundation of civic virtue.
Not only members of the public, but elected officials must work for the common good. Legislators should not make a law that serves the interests of one specific group at the expense of the rights and the legitimate interests of the rest of the community.
Government isn't perfect, mostly because the people in it aren't perfect. Due to this, the government can't solve every particular problem.
For this reason, we will always need virtuous people to stand up and fight for what is right, changing their communities and sometimes even our government.
When slavery was legal all throughout the South, many such as Harriet Tubman and Frederick Douglass fought for the common good. Their actions exposed them to great personal risk, yet they fought on. They helped create lasting and fundamental change within our country.
More recently, the Chicano movement advocated for social and political empowerment through cultural nationalism. The gay rights movement worked to overturn laws criminalizing homosexuality. They worked to engender more inclusive and tolerant views towards gay people.
These changing attitudes may have helped pave the way for Obergefell v. Hodges, in which the Supreme Court ruled that same-sex couples were allowed to marry.
3 friends co-founded Black Lives Matter, an organization with dozens of chapters all around the world fighting anti-Black racism.
There are many ways in which a citizen can contribute to the common good. One of the biggest ways a citizen can contribute to the common good is by casting informed, carefully considered votes.
Voting is a constitutional right, and if used responsibly, a citizen's voice and ideas can guide one's locality, state, and country.
According to Pew Research, around 2/3 or 66% of the voting eligible population turned out for the 2020 presidential election, the highest turnout in the U.S. in recent years.
Other ways that individuals can also participate in working for the common good are by taking part in peaceful protests and demonstrations. Also, online advocacy.
Not every effort to serve the common good requires or even benefits from government action. Churches, charities, and other groups can address many concerns such as
Feeding the hungry,
sheltering the homeless in your town,
removing litter from parks and other public spaces,
planting trees to shade future generations.
In some cases, these organizations can meet these needs in ways that government cannot or will not.
To conclude, a democratic society is built on civic virtue. In many instances, our government works for the common good. It makes some mistakes and has limitations. For these reasons, we will always need virtuous people ready to stand up and fight for
their community, their state, and our nation. Thank you.
Sorry, I have a cold. You talked about voting, and how important informed voting is and how only 2/3 of Americans vote. Do you think it would be beneficial to the common good to make voting mandatory in the US?
No, I do not believe that it would be good to make voting mandatory. For it to be virtuous in voting, it has to come out of it has to come from you. You have to put aside your own self-interest and vote.
And adding on to my colleague, voting can be virtuous by doing your research, watching the news, and know who you're voting for. I do not believe that voting is virtuous if you are not doing these things, as you will not know who you're voting for and what they represent.
In addition to both of my colleagues, if voting were to be mandatory, then people could just go and just pick the one who has the prettiest name. They wouldn't do research, as my colleague Aiden has stated.
Well, I actually disagree with all of my colleagues because the idea of making voting mandatory could be a good thing because it could help other people watch the news and find out about who they're voting for in their country.
I would like to disagree with my colleague Dylan, as I think not many people in America have the time on their hands to do the proper research on candidates before they vote, and it's not fair to them to force voting onto them. Therefore, they would go into a voting center and make a vote that is not based on facts and research and only on propaganda that they've maybe seen on social media.
In addition, voting is something that allows us to express our opinions. As Jen Stoltenberg states, voting allows us to add our voice to the chorus that forms opinions and the basis to actions.
Thank you. I have a question about something you said in your testimony, that elected officials should not pass laws that only benefit a few people. They should always think of the common good. Isn't that the point of representative democracy in something like the House, where an elected official should just be thinking about their few people?
I do not believe that they should just be thinking about one specific person. As James Madison said in Federalist 10, a democracy that will not work because of the inconsistencies, the injustice, and the confusion.
In addition to my colleague, although representative democracy, the representatives should be thinking of the people they are representing, they should think about how the outcome could affect everyone. Therefore, although it is sort of the purpose of a representative democracy to think about who specifically you're representing, thinking about the outcome for everyone should be something on their minds.
Well, I actually disagree with both my colleagues. I think a representative democracy, with them only benefiting a few of their people that they represent, is a good idea because you can't always satisfy every single person, and satisfying the people they represent is probably the best choice.
Although I do agree with my colleague's previous statement, just benefiting one group can have a major effect on another, which is very unfair and is not what the founders wanted in our new government.
Okay, so I'm gonna imagine that you, collectively or individually, are in charge of a city or a state. What policies or programs would you implement to encourage civic virtue in the pursuit of the common good in your residents?
I personally think that encouraging volunteer hours on high schoolers would help them and open their minds to civic virtue, as it ultimately benefits their community. And as they grow older, they will only continue to participate in volunteering and doing service hours and attending city council meetings and things of that nature.
I would like to disagree with my colleague, as I believe that I would implement laws about voting and how people should step up and vote, because voting is one of the main constitutional rights that you have. And when people don't vote, it could balance out the government.
In addition to my colleague, an example of civic virtue is actually something that our school has done. We have previously participated in another competition called Direct Democracy, where we implemented a bill that said that all high schools should have a required life skills class that would teach them things about voting and even simple things like how to change a tire to prepare them for the future. And when they come of age to vote, they're already properly prepared. So that is something that we could do to better enforce civic virtue.
In addition, when we were doing this competition, we conducted a survey. We asked high schoolers and other middle schoolers if they knew how to do basic things like cooking, changing a tire, and things like that. And most of them said no. High school is supposed to prepare you for the future. And if it doesn't do this, then
So which comes first? Civic virtue from an individual or your community or your school requiring civic virtue? Does it kind of like voting? Does it have to be mandatory for me to be raised as a virtuous citizen?
I personally believe that civic virtue should come from your heart, and that's what you want to do. An example is feeding a homeless man and not telling anybody about it. No one's around, and you're not posting it on social media.
To agree with my colleague Aiden, if you put aside your own self-interest for the common good as an individual, you can help contribute and make society better. In fact, you can even encourage other people to do virtuous acts such as voting and fighting for other people's rights by protesting.
While I agree with my colleagues for the most part, I think that making mandatory service hours would be a better implementation, not all the time, but for a little bit, like how school hours have mandatory time hours. Because if we do this, it could help people find out their dreams and what they like to do. Because if without it, most people probably wouldn't even try doing things like that.
To disagree with my colleague Dylan, sometimes mandatory volunteer work can deter people from the right path. They can not want to do virtuous things.
I don't see eye to eye with my colleague on that. I personally think that high schoolers, for example, that maybe have to do 40 hours a month of service hours or volunteer hours, they might not appreciate it in the time being. However, when they grow older and their brain properly matures, they will look back and realize how much they were actually benefiting their community, and that will just push them closer to civic virtue, and they will want to participate in the common good even more so.
Quickly, I'm just going to throw a new topic out there. Do you think that the technological advancements and social media we've had in the past few years, has that affected people's ability to work for the common good?
Yes, I believe that it has affected them, as it has allowed many online groups to get together, maybe sign online petitions to certain things, online protests. And I think technology advancements have allowed greater opportunities for civic virtue and working for the common good.
In addition to my colleague Aiden, an example of this is the online community I believe it's called Disability Visibility, which is an online community that is spreading information about rights for disabled people and other minority groups.
in addition to what my colleague Aiden said, Greta Thunberg was only 15 when she started raising awareness. Oh,
Go ahead and finish, please.
Okay, so Greta Thunberg was only 15 when she started raising awareness for climate change on social media.
Yeah, great, thank you. Yes, very well done. Thank you, that was so energetic and passionate. Your unit, has clearly sat down and had these arguments with each other and studied this material for months now. It shows, because you were ready to go with absolutely everything we threw at you. And I think we threw a lot at you. Civic virtue is, a complicated subject, and the way this question is written, you could talk about anything. And go in circles. You easily could just say, well, I think voting should be mandatory, but that cheapens the process, but we really need it. And you didn't get lost in that. You all had an opinion and jumped in and said, I disagree with my colleague, which is absolutely right and fair. But you supported that really well and didn't get caught in when we challenge you saying, well, actually, you're right. I could see it that way too. You said, this is what I believe. you could bring in, just to strengthen a little bit, you could bring in more examples. You were good with examples of what something would look like, but you could bring in evidence from history or philosophy. So I believe this because I subscribe to such and such philosopher, or studies show, for example, there is some research that shows if mandatory voting was implemented, people would naturally say, okay, I have to go to the polls. I'm going to do a little bit of research. And they actually do more research than none. And they don't necessarily just show up and vote for Mickey Mouse in a write-in election every single time. So, you could say, well, actually research shows this. Research shows that people wouldn't put the effort in if mandatory voting was implemented. So just a little tip on a couple of things that I think would make your arguments, even stronger. But your arguments were very well understood by us and passionate and really enjoyable to listen to today. Thank you.
Yeah, I think great job overall. Alyssa once again scooped most of my feedback anyway, but I'll reiterate a lot of it. I think your opening statement was good. You answered all parts of the questions. It was organized. You had examples. I liked that you right up front defined like common good, civic virtue, because this is such a broad kind of nebulous topic that I like just, what are we talking about? Like you told us right off the bat. And I find that helpful and grounding. So we're all on the same page. And yeah, I think you have a good, synergy, like working together. I think one example, I'd asked a question and one of you, gave a yes or no answer and kind of why. And then one of you, like right after, came with like a really apt example, like to support what the other one had just said. And then someone else had one. So that was really good. I think that was just a good teamwork. And also, it's okay to take different positions and disagree. And I think you did that a good amount. And I think that makes it interesting a lot of times. I will say, like, don't feel like you have to sometimes, and you're a group of 5, so it's a little different. But I think sometimes like people just want to participate and they feel like they have to like jump in and pile on with like a different, oh, here's another take or something. It wasn't too bad, but just, don't feel like you got to force some of these answers or to make answers long. If one of your colleagues kind of nailed exactly what you were going to say, it's cool to just, let that carry. I think the one thing, maybe, yes, more examples, especially like, historical or just the underlying theory or like how it connects back to some of these constitutional principles. And with this question in particular, I think that's a little tricky because we are sort of talking about, today and what would you do and kind of big picture, that it's not as natural to like link back to Locke or, James Madison or something. But to the extent you kind of can show that you're connecting the really good everyday examples you're giving, like, if you're going to talk about things you could do for the homeless or some of the other examples you had, just kind of try to tie back in. It just shows, obviously you all know this stuff really well. And I think that just shows even more like how you understand all the background and all the supporting reasoning for it. But overall, like, great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you to our judges and thank you to your teacher coaches for preparing you so well for today. I hope you all have a wonderful weekend in DC.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I forgot to mention, I like the banner. That was, yes,
Thank you. Thank you. Amazon special.
yes, good to know.
All right, and thank you, Nova Middle School supporters.
Thank you for being our timekeeper.
Oh,
Yep.
thank you. Great.
Thank you. Proud of you. I told you were gonna kill it.
Great job.
You're awesome. I don't know why you worry every time. You're a superstar. You are. Have a good one.
So fun
You
around.
too. Congratulations.
Recording stopped.